semiconductors. Those seem to be the targeted areas that the U.S. president is getting quite aggressive on. And so if we can come up with some kind of common arrangement on those issues, those sectoral agreements by August 1st, we'll look at that as a win.
I'm proud to stand shoulder to shoulder with my fellow premiers as Team Canada, and it's never been more important and never been more united.
Canada still claims to be a united country, but now that unity is nothing more than a thin coat of paint covering deep cracks. Ontario Premier Doug Ford proudly declared, "This is the most united we've been in years." Yet behind closed doors, every province is quietly carving its own path out of something that feels like it's collapsing. The harsh truth, Canada is unraveling, and what's left might soon be nothing more than a lonely capital called Ottawa, clinging to federal power while major provinces turn their eyes toward the United States. On camera, premiers smile politely and pose for group photos, calling themselves Team Canada. But reality tells a different story. Ontario has decided to issue its own work permits, refusing to wait for Ottawa's approval. Alberta is negotiating directly with American energy companies, bypassing federal bureaucracy. Saskatoon is openly building a cross-border trade corridor in partnership with Alberta.
I guess we'll see what happens. I mean, I would say that the entire country has changed their approach on major projects of national interest.
Even within the federal government, Immigration Minister Mark Miller publicly disagreed with Prime Minister Mark Carney, a rift rarely seen in modern Canadian politics. What's presented as unity is, in truth, a country quietly splitting apart. To prevent further trade war escalation, Ottawa has been forced into painful compromises with Washington. In late March, Canada announced $15.5 billion in countertariffs, but simultaneously began easing some trade barriers for U.S. companies, particularly in aluminum and auto sectors. Trump has threatened a 35% tariff on Canadian exports if no sectoral deals are reached by August, pushing Carney into accepting piecemeal negotiations to buy time.
We begin tonight with focus once again on the U.S. president's previous referrals to Canadians as nasty. Amid the trade war, the U.S. ambassador to this country provoking strong reaction here after suggesting at a conference in the States.
Alberta Premier Danielle Smith criticized sharply. Canada is selling its energy short just to get a few promises from Washington. Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe was even blunter. "We are begging for every dollar as if Canada is no longer an independent country." The private sector's voting with its wallet. According to the Conference Board of Canada, foreign direct investment dropped 18% in the first half of 2025, while investment into the U.S. rose by 11%. Major oil producers like Cenovus and Suncor are shifting parts of their operations to Texas and Montana, attracted by tax breaks and fewer environmental restrictions. Even domestic companies are expanding south rather than reinvesting at home. An internal report by Canadian manufacturers and exporters bluntly stated, "This is the largest capital flight Canada has faced in over a decade."
We have Genevieve here out of Montreal.
At Maker House, the push to buy Canadian is as strong as ever.
We're up still double last year this past week. So even after Canada Day, the push to buy Canadian is sustaining.
Economic turmoil isn't just dividing provinces, it's fueling widespread public anger. According to the Fraser Institute, the average Canadian family now spends 42.3% of its income on taxes, more than on food, housing, and clothing combined. The resentment is spilling into public discourse. If Alberta joins the U.S., at least we won't be stuck feeding a failing government. We work hard just to bankroll Ottawa's bloated bureaucracy.
We talk about possibly leaving Canada because why should we stay here? Just be overtaxed, underserviced, healthcare sucks, education sucks, government is bloated.
What used to be a fringe complaint is now a mainstream sentiment. Discussions about joining the U.S. or creating autonomous provinces are becoming more common, no longer whispered, but openly debated. Canada is edging closer to a breaking point. Ottawa continues to preach unity, but provinces are acting independently, corporations are pulling out, and citizens are losing faith in the system. If this trajectory continues, Canada as a united nation may cease to exist. Ottawa risks becoming nothing more than an isolated capital, while Alberta, Saskatchewan, and even Ontario drift closer to the American economic orbit. The question is no longer will Canada break apart, but rather how soon will the political map change?
The Canada's new government will do several things. First, we will take a series of measures to stabilize our domestic steel market and prevent harmful trade diversion arising from current trade tensions.
When President Trump raised tariffs to 50% on Canadian steel in early June, the blow was immediate. Within days, exports collapsed, jobs were cut, and one of Canada's most tightly integrated cross-border industries found itself severed from its biggest customer. This week, Prime Minister Mark Carney finally responded, not with threats or retaliation, but with something more calculated, a structural shift. One designed not just to react, but to rebuild.
The trade actions of the United States are further transforming global steel market dynamics and supply chain. Let's be clear. Canada will be one of the countries most impacted by these developments.
The plan starts with a clear message. Canada will no longer be the world's most open steel market. For decades, nearly 2/3 of Canada's steel consumption has come from imports, while over 90% of its steel exports flowed south to the United States. Now, that equation is being rewritten. By the end of this month, Canada will implement strict tariff rate quotas. For countries without a free trade agreement, imports will be capped at 50% of their 2024 volumes. Anything above that will face a 50% tariff. For FTA partners, the cap is 100%, with the same 50% penalty beyond the threshold. A second, more targeted measure aims directly at Chinese origin steel. Any product containing steel melted and poured in China, regardless of where it's finished, will face additional tariffs, with one exception. U.S. steel remains untouched under existing CUSMA terms. This isn't retaliation, it's insulation.
So moving forward, we must diversify our trade relationships. And above all, we must rely more on Canadian steel for Canadian projects.
Rather than escalate tensions, Carney is using this moment to reorient the domestic market. That means investing, not just protecting. The federal government will inject $1 billion through the Strategic Innovation Fund. This money is earmarked for Canadian steel producers to modernize equipment, produce higher-value products, and fill the gaps left by lost U.S. contracts. To support workers directly, $70 million will be funneled through labor market development agreements, covering training and income assistance for up to 10,000 steel employees. An additional $150 million in regional support will be prioritized for steel-producing communities, alongside expanded loan access for mid-sized firms, lowering entry requirements, cutting interest rates, and extending loan terms from 5 to 7 years. But perhaps the most transformative change is in federal procurement. Going forward, government contractors will be required to use Canadian steel in major infrastructure, housing, and defense projects. From shipyards to bridges, the steel that builds Canada will now come from within. All of this unfolds in the shadow of Trump's tariff threats. Canada's position is precarious. A 35% blanket tariff on all Canadian goods is scheduled to begin August 1st, unless a bilateral deal is reached first. And yet, Ottawa has not retaliated. Instead, it's holding the door open, keeping tariffs off U.S. steel for now, while maintaining strategic leverage elsewhere. Digital services taxes have been paused. Canada has engaged in fentanyl coordination. Every move is part of a broader strategy to stay at the table, without appearing weak. Though the Prime Minister has acknowledged that no country has secured a deal with the U.S. free of tariffs under this administration, his approach suggests a pivot. The focus now is not on removing tariffs entirely, but shaping where and how they apply. The likely target is a reduced selective rate, 8% to 10% instead of 35%, with carve-outs for essential sectors like autos, energy, and metals.
Say we will continue to do business with the U.S. That's of the year, but we will also work with new partners or partners that we have not developed commercial relationship as deep as the U.S. one, including, of course, with Europe and key Asian countries.
Canada isn't just responding to a crisis. It's laying the foundation for a more self-reliant economy, one where steel is not just exported, but embedded in national development. This shift won't bring back every job. It won't reverse every lost shipment. But it offers breathing room and a pathway forward. Whether or not a deal is reached by August 1st, Canada has already begun to decouple its industrial future from Trump's unpredictability and place it firmly in Canadian hands. In just a month, Canada, China, Singapore, and several other nations sold off $36 billion worth of U.S. Treasury bonds, shaking the foundations of global finance. Losing the dollar's dominance would be like losing a world war. Donald Trump's words during a recent cabinet meeting were more than a warning. They were a declaration. In the middle of growing talks within BRICS to launch a reserve currency designed to challenge the U.S. dollar, Trump has vowed to defend the U.S. dollar at all costs. And in Trump's language, at all costs doesn't mean quiet diplomacy. It means tariffs, pressure, and economic threats. What began as speculation over a BRICS currency plan is now turning into a geopolitical showdown, where money itself has become a weapon. Trump wasted no time in turning words into action. He announced a sweeping 10% tariff on all imports from BRICS nations, warning that any country daring to undermine the US dollar could face additional punitive duties. If they want to use another currency to replace the dollar, they will pay for it, Trump declared. The response was immediate and fierce. Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva blasted Trump as an emperor in disguise, insisting that BRICS would not step back from its plans. In Beijing and New Delhi, trade officials convened closed-door meetings to accelerate bilateral settlements in local currencies and expand BRICS Pay, the digital payment system created to bypass the dollar. But the shockwaves didn't stop with BRICS. Long-standing U.S. allies started to feel uneasy. South Korean media warned that if Trump continued to weaponize tariffs to maintain dollar supremacy, even trusted partners like Japan and South Korea might diversify their foreign reserves. In Brussels, European officials began openly discussing increasing euro and even yuan holdings to reduce political risk from Washington. A recent Pew Research survey revealed a staggering figure. 47% of citizens across allied Asian and European nations now view the U.S. as an economic threat rather than a reliable partner. Financial analysts argue that Trump's tactics are backfiring. Every tariff, every public threat, and every speech only pushes nations closer to exploring alternatives. What was once a theoretical de-dollarization movement is now becoming a practical strategy. Inside BRICS meetings, discussions of a joint reserve currency are moving faster than ever. Preliminary contracts settled through BRICS Pay have already been signed. Russia and India, China and Brazil, skipping the dollar entirely. Even if a formal BRICS reserve currency isn't launched immediately, the psychological shift is happening. Nations are testing life beyond the dollar. The potential consequences for the United States are staggering. If global transactions conducted in US dollars drop from the current 58% to below 50% in the next 5 years, economists warn of a chain reaction. Borrowing costs for the US could spike sharply. Treasury bond interest rates would climb, making it far more expensive to finance federal debt. More importantly, the financial sanction power, Washington's favorite geopolitical weapon, would weaken dramatically. This erosion of financial leverage is exactly what worries U.S. security officials. For decades, the dollar's dominance has allowed America to impose sanctions, freeze assets, and pressure adversaries without firing a single shot. But if major economies can trade outside the dollar system, those sanctions lose their bite. The concern is not just theoretical anymore. Japan, a longtime ally, recently conducted a trial settlement for natural gas imports from Indonesia in yen and rupiah instead of dollars. In the Middle East, Saudi Arabia signed agreements with China to price some oil sales in yuan. These cracks are widening, and Trump's aggressive stance is adding fuel to the fire. Inside the United States, financial experts are split. Some applaud Trump's tough stance, claiming it's necessary to show strength. But others warn that his approach is accelerating exactly what he claims to be fighting. "You can't threaten your way into trust," said one former Treasury official. "The more you weaponize the dollar, the more countries will want to escape it." Trump is turning the US dollar into a battlefield, betting that economic intimidation will force nations to stay loyal. But every threat seems to do the opposite, pushing them further away. As traditional allies diversify reserves, as trade contracts shift to euros, yuan, or BRICS pay, America's leverage begins to erode. The dollar may remain strong for now, but its aura of invincibility is cracking. And the real question is no longer, will BRICS create an alternative currency? The real question is, what will the US do when the world no longer wants to play by the dollar's rules? Because in the end, power doesn't come from slogans or tariffs. It comes from trust. And trust, once lost, is almost impossible to buy back, even with the world's most powerful currency.